I'm Manjula Salvaraja. This is Solve for X. Today we're going to get into extreme heat. 2024 was the hottest year ever recorded. That comes after a decade of even higher temperatures. But this is a record we can't keep breaking.
Manjula, it's not just heat, because I think of heat as like the beginning of it all in a sense.
That's Eleni Miravelli. She's the world's leading expert on heat in cities.
The fact that we're heating up our planet expresses itself in all these different extreme phenomena.
In 2022, the United Nations named her the first ever Global Heat Officer. And before that, she was the Chief Resilience Officer for Athens, Greece.
When I talk about heat, I often talk about heat as global warming, but also what does that mean on a very local level? And that, of course, means heat waves, but it also means tons of other extreme weather events.
We don't have a chief heat officer in any city in Canada yet, unlike Miami in the US, Santiago, Chile, and Freetown, Sierra Leone. But extreme heat is becoming a serious concern here, too.
In 2021, the Pacific Northwest had this incredible heat wave. I remember the city of Lytton, I think it is in Canada, that after a long period of extreme heat, it burned down.
Lytton and other areas in British Columbia suffered abnormally high temperatures that summer.
It was the first time that we started hearing about this heat dome effect.
The day before the fire, it reached 49.6 degrees Celsius. That's over 20 degrees higher than normal, the highest temperature ever recorded in Canada. It's a scary preview of how dangerously hot our climate is becoming. And with urban areas around the world expected to warm even faster in the coming decades, cities are on the front line. This is my conversation with UN's Chief Heat Officer, Eleni Miravelli. Now, we've reached you in Athens today, is that right?
Yes.
And Greece has seen, it's seen hot days, it's seen heat waves. And what the city has, or Greece has, is this category system for heat waves from 0 to 3, with 3 being on the top. Have you ever been in the city during a category 3 heat wave?
We had a few days that were category 3, both in 2024 and in 2023 and in 2021.
Can you describe to me what it feels like to be in the middle of that?
It feels breathless, like it feels like you can't really breathe because it's so hot. And it feels like you don't really want to do anything. You just want to, like, it's really difficult to get motivated to do things.
How hot does it get?
I think it got up to 45 degrees, 44, 45 degrees in Athens. But there are other parts of Greece that I think it went up to 46, 47 degrees Celsius. But for a lot of people, what this means, especially people that are what we call the vulnerable population, it means that they can get really, really sick and end up in the hospital or even, die from it. Any kind of pre-existing conditions, we see people with extreme symptoms end up in hospitals, including mental health conditions. Like everything kind of, our bodies...
It's like amplified.
In a way, yes, get out of whack when we're dealing with extreme heat. So this is the weird thing about heat, that it has a way of going through the city and finding who are the weakest people and the people that are the most poor, actually. If you are in upper class or upper middle class, you can, leave the city. You can have air conditioning on. You can work from your job that's on a computer and not manual, in an office that is, cooler or, whatever. Like it really, and this is really what I find very painful about this particular kind of extreme weather, because it really targets the weakest. It's a very unfair climate condition. And the other, of course, vulnerable populations are the people that are workers, either in agriculture or construction or any kind of physical work is really difficult. And the problems that we often have there is that we have work-related injuries. There was a report that came out, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, where they examined 11 million cases and then correlated them to the temperatures of the days that these injuries were reported. And there was a very direct correlation.
Part of what you're talking about is the health portion is really important, but there's also this impact to the economy. And I would also imagine that there's also an impact to infrastructure, right?
Yes.
That there's some systems that they just can't function at those temperatures.
Manjula, you're absolutely right. I mean, if we go into the economies of cities, they do indeed suffer, and we know how much we lose in GDP during the days of extreme heat. As far as infrastructure is concerned, we do have problems on a lot of different systems. So we know that train tracks buckle. We know that our phones and communication systems have trouble working. Our phones, after a specific temperature, they stop functioning. They go black. Or our computers, they also go down. But we've had problem with asphalt in some countries, depending on the mixture of asphalt they have, because it starts getting kind of soggy and sticky.
And clammy, wow.
We have problems with bridges, like in England. When they had the heat wave in 2022, they had to cover a whole bridge, which was I think it was made out of steel. I don't know what kind of material, but some kind of metal. So they covered it.
To cool it down
so that it didn't absorb heat from radiation. Yeah.
Buckling train tracks, melting asphalt. During extreme heat, cities are grinding to a halt and becoming dangerous places to be. This feels like uncharted territory. We're seeing records being broken in terms of high temperatures in cities around the world. But how else is heat changing as a result of climate change?
Well, we do have much longer periods of heat waves. For example, in Southern Europe, the summer of 2024, we had 66 days of extreme heat stress. It's called UTCI, which doesn't only measure temperature, but it also measures relative humidity. So it kind of gives you a better sense of the comfort of the body, right? So we had high stress conditions for 66 days, when the average we've had for the last decade was 29. So that just goes to show you how it's more than doubled and how this is really changing the way we experience it, right? Because it's longer and it feels like there's no respite. It feels like you can't escape it. You wake up every day and again you deal with this unbearable kind of sense of heat that's the other. I was thinking as you were talking, Angela, that it's so difficult also to describe it. Like you asked me before, how does it feel to be in a city of 45 degrees? I don't know how to describe it. Like it's not so easy to describe it. So anyway,
is it? I imagine that you can't sweat, you feel sluggish. Right?
Yes.
I mean, I feel that on even slightly hot days out here.
Yes. Headaches also. You feel like you're a bit confused. Your thoughts are not clear. You get sluggish. It's just a condition of general malaise, of discomfort, of intense discomfort.
And in some way that you've described it, we've talked about how heat discriminates. It's also sort of silent in the way that it affects people.
Yes. So, and that's why we call it the silent killer. I mean, this is what we've been calling heat, because all of these things that we've been discussing right now is like the fact that in a way heat has no representation. It's hard for journalists to show images of it. It's hard for people to talk about it. The impacts are not visible. The impacts are not even knowable often because, again, there's no data often that is immediately available. So the whole thing is like this weird, ghostly presence that actually attacks our weakest.
Why is this so difficult to track?
To a large extent because a lot of problems are not caused directly by heat. Like the people that actually die from heat stroke is a very, very small percentage of the people that lose their lives because of heat. So people, for example, as we said before, with heart problems, when they go to the hospital and if they lose their lives, the hospital doesn't say that, it was a hot day or it's probably linked to the fact that it was a heat wave. They just say that it was cardiac arrest. So most of the victims of heat are not reported as such. So we have to find other ways of counting them. And that has been a challenge.
I find it interesting that Eleni's background is in anthropology, but it makes sense. To adapt to an increasingly hotter planet, we need experts of all kinds, scientists, urban planners, as well as anthropologists, who can help decode our social structures and devise ways to shift behavior. I look across Canada here. I mentioned to you that we identify ourselves, we see ourselves as a cold country, right? And one of the things that happens is when the weather gets slightly warm, the sandals come out, everyone heads for the sun.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to kind of reflect on this idea that we have these cultural understandings of heat. Does that affect our ability to adapt, our readiness? Does it affect that?
Absolutely. This is crucial what you're saying, because what we need to do is we need to change behaviors, right? We have to kind of decide, each of us, that we have to do things differently because of extreme heat. And that is often really, really difficult. People in cold countries feel that heat is a wonderful thing, and they all kind of go outside and they spend as much time as they can to kind of luxuriate in the sun and in the heat. So they don't understand how dangerous it is, and they are not willing to see it as a danger because they've been programmed to see it as something that's absolutely delightful. And it's really hard to get them to feel the risk in it. On the other hand, for countries where they're used to heat, people feel like, well, we know this. This is not a big deal. We've been dealing with heat for a very long time, and this is just a little bit more hot. So how bad can it be? All of these different symptoms come on very fast. And it's really, really, unless you really know what's going on, it's really difficult to identify. Water often isn't enough. We have to kind of move the person to the shade, call an ambulance as soon as possible if we see somebody losing their consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just for us, but also if we want to help other people, we have to really start learning the symptomatology and learning what we should do. And this is not common knowledge yet.
One of the things that you've advocated for is naming heat waves. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that idea there?
I always felt that categorization of heat waves is actually more important than the names of heat waves. I think that what naming does is like taking it a step higher, because it makes heat waves into an entity. And we tend as humans, going back to the anthropological kind of side of things, we tend of humans to take entities more seriously than things that do not have like a name, right? Things that have a name actually are more, they exist more. So
that is so true, because I can still, I think of Hurricane Katrina, and I can think of the effects around it, and how so many other things were blamed on it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
My daughter, who is 25, was telling me the first time that she heard, because it was in Seville a couple of years ago that the first heat wave was named. I think it was named Zoe, actually. There were a lot of people advocating about naming, but I wasn't really persuaded. And then my daughter suddenly said that when she heard the name Zoe for a heat wave, she got extremely sad. And kind of, it was like it moved her emotionally, because she felt that it was suddenly something that was not just a fleeting thing, or heat was kind of rising or whatever, but it had like an emotional effect on her, which really surprised me. I really didn't expect that. But I think that that's part of it, like the whole idea of anthropomorphizing something, of giving it the name. It can actually affect us in ways that are much stronger.
And maybe on a on a municipal level or even at an individual level, it makes you do things. Like you might decide that, oh, I'm going to cancel that outdoor wedding, or I'm going to make sure that my neighbors don't go for a run, or a city may decide that this might not be the day that we go out and do this big construction activity, whatever it is, right? So it drives that kind of behavior too.
Precisely, that's the idea. We are talking about the hottest years ever recorded, 2023 and 2024. And if you see it in charts, you see the years for 1850 going kind of a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher in temperature. And then suddenly you have 2023 and 2024 like go off the charts and like with a big distance from the previous things. And then you look at CO2 emissions and they've been going up. The curve is going increasingly up. It's not curving downwards. And I don't know, I think people kind of feel like we are kind of putting a cap in our CO2 emissions, that we're doing a little bit better. Truth is that we are doing better in the sense that we have included much more renewables in the mix. But the CO2 is still going up even though we've put the renewables in. So demand for energy has increased very much because of heat, as we were saying before. People need more units of AC units, and because of data centers, actually, which are guzzling up a lot of our energy. But basically, it's more, and it's going up. I think we have to go more radical because nobody's actually moving.
So, Annie, let's talk about solutions. You've talked about air conditioning as being this egotistical solution. What do you mean by that?
Well, with air conditioning, we cool ourselves or we cool our house or our office, and then it radiates heat. Not radiates, it
pushes out heat.
Yeah. Pushes out heat into the public space. So it ends up heating up the public space even more. So people need to use more air conditioning, or people that don't have air conditioning suffer from much more heat. We need to understand our cities like little systems. So you have to kind of figure out how to make the public space cooler so that the buildings need less mechanical cooling. Ideally, you also need the buildings to be built in ways and to be designed in ways that have passive cooling elements. And you could do that in retrofit. But again, I think the best way to think about these passive cooling elements in buildings is to think about air moving. So to think about creating cross ventilation or other ways of ventilating, which, is very interesting. And we know a lot about these from the way that people used to build
houses.
Times.
It's so interesting that you say that. I was brought up in Sri Lanka, and I remember as a child going up to northern Sri Lanka to a place called Jaffna, which is a city up there, and going back to sort of the ancestral home. And I mean, all it had was the occasional fan, but fans are also expensive because they need electricity.
Right.
So you would have houses with atriums in the middle and sort of like lattice screens everywhere. You would have bricks, but then the bricks would have sort of like holes in between. And
Manjula, I love to hear this. I really love to hear these kind of descriptions of these buildings that actually were built with this incredible traditional knowledge of being adaptive to the local climate conditions, right? I mean, centuries of knowledge had gone into this vernacular architecture exactly because we didn't have fossil fuels, and people built houses based on how can they cool themselves and heat themselves in more like passive ways. And, this idea of having a central atrium, of having these lattices, of having these holes in the walls, of having white walls or white kind of roofs, or, all these things that are so, I find also so beautiful.
They're beautiful.
They're so beautiful, right? I mean, I can, like having a central little garden with elements of water in a house that's built around it is such a beautiful thing. People gather there. It kind of creates a cool atmosphere. It's like, it's brilliant. We've gotten to this modernist architecture, which not only, I mean, it had its logic and it was a democratization of things and da da da. I mean, I don't want to be ranting on it because, of course, it actually had amazing positive elements. But right now, it's not really good for us anymore. We have to go back to other ways of building and other ways of understanding.
But how do you do that in a city? Like, what are some ways? I mean, you have the experience from Athens as well, right? I mean, it can't just be lattice screens, right? So
It can
how
be
do,
lattice screens, though, to a large extent. I mean, a lot of it has to do with shade. So we have to understand that shading really, really changes the comfort of our bodies, either indoors or outdoors. So we have to make sure that we have a lot of shading elements. So that's something that we could do. You could put extra shading and of stopping the heat coming in. Another thing is we have to make sure that we create openings, as you said. We have to make sure that we understand how heat moves upwards, right? And this, I think, will become more and more second nature to us as we move into decades that are hotter. So this knowledge that our grandparents and great-grandparents had is going to come back to us, I think.
I was struck by what Eleni said about the power of design. Those lattice shades I grew up with, if you haven't seen them, they can be built right into the facades of buildings, or they could be in place of a window with simple slats or gorgeous wood-carved openings, letting the breeze in while blocking the sun's rays. Compare that to how we build today with lots of glass and concrete, creating what's known as the urban heat island effect. Studies show that urban spaces can be 10 to 15 degrees hotter than surrounding rural areas. And even within the city, depending on the neighborhood, how wealthy or green it is, temperatures can vary widely.
And Manjula, even a couple of degrees less can make an enormous difference. Like 2 or 3 degrees less heat is enormous. It's really big for our bodies.
And there's a place for policymakers too here, because
Absolutely.
we're not talking about the
Absolutely.
individual homeowner. We're talking about roof gardens. We're talking about more parks, these are some of the changes that you made in Athens.
So a big part of how policymakers can make a difference is how to make the public space cooler. And this has a lot to do with bringing more nature in the city. This is like the number one most important and most significant and most effective way of cooling cities, making them much more, I don't mean a little bit, like adding a few trees here and there. I mean significantly bringing trees in our cities. And how can we do that? To a large extent, again, unfortunately, our policymakers have to get rid of cars because a lot of our public space is dedicated to cars, to private cars. Give a big chunk of what now is our public space instead of to cars, to both slow mobility, which is, moving, walking, bikes, of course, public transportation, and ideally electric public transportation. And then we need to do legislation for buildings, as we have, for example, for earthquakes. The word escapes me right now, but rules of how we build and what actually is acceptable in relation to heat, which we don't have.
Because you're right. Right now, if you think of a place like Tokyo, you have to build earthquake-proof buildings. So
Yeah.
in a way, what you're talking about is I don't know if heat-proof is the right word, but I think what you're saying is
Heat-proof. Yes.
heat-proof.
Increasingly, I'm realizing that the most important thing, more than anything else, is water when we're talking about extreme heat. And that cities have to think first and foremost about how to create more robust, have more backup systems.
Why is that? Is it because you're thinking of them as heat sinks? Is that why?
No,
Why
because
water?
we're constantly realizing that if nature is our main weapon against extreme heat in cities, nature needs water. And that is what will keep it alive. And that is what will stop it from just shutting down and being extremely stressed or even dying. And a lot of cities don't prioritize, of course, irrigation when there is a period of drought or a period of extreme heat. And this is really, really, really significant because we know that around the world, water is becoming more and more an issue, more of a resource
Scarcity.
that we are seeing it being depleted.
Now, because you mentioned water, I heard that you worked on there's this old Roman aqueduct that runs under, I mean, tell me about this. Tell me about this Roman aqueduct under the city of Athens.
Yes. So it's 24 kilometers long, and it is running underground. It was built, as you said, during Roman times. I mean, it's really, it's unbelievable. How did these people build it? They actually, they build it with a perfect incline for 24 kilometers so that the water doesn't run too fast at times nor too slow and kind of become stagnant. It's perfect.
And it's in good shape?
Incline, and it's in really good shape.
Wow.
And it has been interrupted by, I think, a subway line and a couple of roads and stuff like that, but it still has the capacity to move water. I think it's close to 1 million cubic liters that per year that goes through it. So it's kind of a lot. So now the metropolitan area, the region of Attica, has decided to actually tap into it and use it for irrigation. And this is really amazing. I mean, it will have a little bit of processing, but it will basically go to irrigate parks, new parks and existing ones, and creating a few water features also on the surface to help cool this. It goes through 9 different municipalities of the metropolitan area. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this starting to be implemented.
That's incredible. Yeah. And it comes back to what you were saying with that idea that water now in the city actually keeps these green spaces alive and functioning at times where, I mean, you're going to have a heat wave again this summer, a couple of heat waves potentially this summer. So when you think of the moment that we're in now, how do you think that future generations will look back at it?
I think they will think that we were really stupid. And I think they'll hate us for it. I think that they won't be able to understand how, if we had the knowledge, we hadn't been acting on it. This is like what I think they won't forgive us. I don't even understand why we haven't been acting on it. It's difficult. I mean, I do, and I don't. But it's difficult to fathom the fact that there isn't enough urgency built to our change of behavior and change of policy. If we know that water is becoming more and more scarce, like in my city, we are really facing with extraordinary problems of lack of water in the next couple of years. There's no campaign telling us to try to economize. There's no effort globally. We're flushing clean water, drinkable water down our toilets every time we go to the bathroom. It's kind of insane. And we say that people in the future will think of that and say that we were absolutely mad. Or, the way that we build our buildings that are so dependent on air conditioning, and they don't have even windows. You can't open a window. They're all like locked in these glass buildings that are so wrong for our climates. All of these crazy things that we haven't changed policies to adapt to our changing conditions. And we are being really foolish in the way that we keep on going like nothing's different.
But there's some hope there, too. I mean, take even the role that you have. The fact that there exists now a UN heat officer, and the fact that there's a handful of cities, I think there's probably about 12 cities in the world that have heat officers now. I think that's meaningful because it shows that some of these cities have decided that this is a problem and that we need a person devoted to it.
True. That is very true. And there's more and more. I think the last 2 or 3 years have really changed the way that we understand and the way that we have been dealing with heat. And I see extraordinary difference. Like from 2021 to 2025, the amount of heat action plans and the amount of early warning systems and the way that these issues are being communicated is night and day. What we haven't been working on as much is the design, the redesigning of our cities and actually bringing more nature into the cities. If we see it globally, it's actually the nature in cities is still diminishing. So we have to really step on that. We have to understand that this is crucial, and we have to make sure that both nature in cities, but also forests outside of cities is something we have to support and create more of.
What do you think the role of technology could be here? Is there anything exciting that could help address this problem?
Absolutely. There's tons of technologies that are right now coming up. That could be from the materials that we build the houses or that we cover our homes with, like reflexive paint that is cutting edge right now, and it's something that could really make an enormous difference. So that's one aspect. But also technology can better assess where we can prioritize our solutions to make sure that we protect more the most vulnerable. So this is another part that data and technology is really helping us with.
So it's like predictive, is it predictive analytics? Is that what you're thinking about?
It's predictive, or it's real time. It can also, we have, for example, some AI application that we have seen in cities in India where they can do super local solutions of assessing in real time which buildings that are most hot at the moment to inform the people to kind of move in cooler buildings or in cooler parts of the city. So there's like so many things happening in through technological innovation. It's very promising, and I'm very hopeful.
One of the things that I've found quite interesting, I've heard cases of it being used in healthcare, but is this idea of the digital twin, right?
Yes.
I don't know if that's something that excites you as well.
It can be very exciting.
If you haven't heard the term before, a digital twin is essentially a virtual replica of a real-world system. That could be a body, building, or even as big as a city.
As long as we don't overdo it, because with digital twins, sometimes people get overexcited to create a duplicate of reality. And often we don't need all this information. Like digital twins can work in very targeted ways. So often scientists and technologists get really carried away and kind of try to create these enormous things and more data and more data and more data that are not really useful. This is why it's important to get scientists and technologists and data providers and creators to work closely with cities and with communities so that they don't go off on their kind of crazy scientific
journeys. Like it's a very it's very pragmatic.
Yes, we need them to be a little bit more linked to reality and to what people need, because we need solutions fast and we need them now.
Eleni, that was such a fascinating chat. Thank you. And thank you for telling me about the aqueduct.
Oh, thank you, Manjula. Thank you so much. Thanks for this interview. It was great fun to talk to you.
It's clear that our cities are heating up, and that's going to change the way society works. We can't air condition our way out of this. In the next episode, we'll take a look at some of the technical solutions innovators are working on to help keep us cool. And if you want to see photos of the architecture in the city I grew up in and the Roman aqueduct Eleni helped repurpose in Athens, you can find all the details in the show notes. Solve for X is brought to you by Mars. This episode was produced by Ellen Payne-Smith. Lara Torvey and Sana McBool and Sarah Liss are the associate producers. Catherine Hayward is the executive producer. Max Swain composed the theme song and the music in this episode. Gab Harpel is our mix engineer. I'm your host, Manjula Selvarajah.
Solve for X is brought to you by Mars, North America's largest urban innovation hub and a registered charity. Mars supports startups and accelerates the adoption of high-impact solutions to some of the world's biggest challenges. For more information, visit marsdd.com. And we want to hear from you. Drop us a line to share your ideas, questions, and feedback. What innovations are you curious about? Email us at media@marsdd.com.